Hi, Paul. Morning. It's November the 16th. So here's the session you asked about on Poland. Bassel is here joining us to just give us a brief of what happened. Bassel, if you could go ahead, please.
Yes, sure, Uday. So yesterday, at least two people were killed in a missile strike that hit a grain drying facility in a village in eastern Poland, which is 6 kilometers away from the borders with Ukraine. So the emergency services said that the strike hit a facility close to a private school in the area. Polish authorities have also announced that they have increased the country's security readiness of some of its military units. This comes after the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that the missiles which fell on the village were Russian made. However, the United States and other Western countries are still investigating the incident, and a significant statement was said by US President Joe Biden. He stated that it is unlikely that the missiles were fired from Russia. So it actually remains unclear who is behind the missile attack as investigations continue.
Yeah, but Basil, that doesn't mean that it could have been Russians firing it from inside another country, right? So I think we've got to take all this with a grain of salt. Look, obviously there was a missile strike. It does look more and more like NATO, that fundamentally the lack of follow-up by NATO and the lack of sincerity by NATO in negotiations with Russia set up a existential security threat on their border. NATO, which is supposedly about peace and survivability for itself, created a war. I'm not sure that was its original intention. I'm not sure what Russia would possibly gain out of firing rounds into Poland. It doesn't make sense. So I think, like blowing up pipelines, we should not rule out skullduggery, and really Western investigations, I mean, they lost credibility of integrity during the lead up to the war since 2014. I don't think they've done anything that was going to lead to a peaceful situation. And the only thing that they've said consistently true is that they're going to try and expand NATO, but not at any time did they try to avoid conflict with Russia. It's almost like they enticed it. Now, whether it's American posturing or whether it's NATO, this does not sit good for Europe. I mean, NATO is helping everybody to feel less stable and less secure because a war started, and the war's on the European borders. Countries are now getting told to, come on in and join the NATO. Well, the NATO is no longer much of a peace group. It's more of a warmongering at the moment. Nobody seems to be trying to turn off this war. Meanwhile, the big winner, as currencies destabilise and devalue, is America, because it's seen still as a safe haven currency. Money's flowing that way, that the midterm elections throw further instability, potentially civil unrest in America, if not in their next election cycle. Then 4 years after that, they're grappling with some fairly vague leadership in the country, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republic. Uday, how do you see this affects clients, if at all? I mean, is this a particularly significant thing in terms of the conflict de-escalating or escalating?
Well, it definitely is. I think because as Poland is a NATO member, there is a specific article that if NATO does decide to blame Russia, as you were saying, if it goes on its warmongering path, then NATO could get potentially involved in the conflict. We can't rule that out at this point. And to add to what you were saying, Paul, wading through the propaganda and misinformation is a task in itself. And whichever side you're on, a continuation of the conflict for whatever reasons doesn't bode well for Europe or Ukraine and its people either.
Well, I think what we can lead into it is the ongoing energy crisis. Costs of fuel, inflation are going to continue. Funnily enough, and perhaps a primary motivation is that's going to help the American economy to build up its coffers again, because of the flow of currencies heading that way. It's going to further galvanise, the BRICS company have invited another 12 countries to join. You've got Saudi Arabia, Iran, that bloc, China. the polarization doesn't seem to be in the best interest of world peace. And I mean, it's only the one-eyed that really think Putin started this war. The fact that the Western people, anybody that's emotionally attached to the Western media or Ukraine, emotional attachment helps them analyse that Putin's bad. But this war was really avoidable, and NATO's warmongering and the posturing by the Western leaders is grave concern. I think we can also see issues with supply chain. We can see issues with companies trying to work out their energy supply sustainability. We're going to see a shift on how countries have to pay for oil and gas. Russia, of course, is a massive exporter, so they're in a position of strength. The longer this war goes on, the more corruption and federalism in the Russian military machine is going to get ironed out. And if America's trying to see their capabilities by trying to draw them into a weapon, they may be just getting them honed out and hardened up and get them to re-professionalise their military. So America may get more than it's bargained for on this one, as may NATO. Now, it's sad that we have this discussion because I know that we make this public, which we will. We're going to have 1 million people condemning it, but what we're trying to do is give people the reality of what's going on, what's a popular angle. So Uday, keep a real close eye on this. 50-50 on this, that it couldn't be just an attempt to allow themselves the evidence to hide behind ACCA, the weapons of mass destruction lie. Is these missiles one of that, or is it a genuine, it's easy to say they're Russian missiles, doesn't mean Russians fired them, especially given that the Ukraine has been purposely and intentionally flooded with warfare and with supplies of weapons from a multitude of countries. And both Ukraine and Russia are capturing each other weapons when they win battles. So this is a real vague situation, but one that's significant. We need to monitor it closely. So thank you. Thanks, Bassel. Thanks, Uday. Anything else to close out on, Uday?
No, Paul, we'll keep an eye out on this closely.
All right. Thank you. Cheers, gents. Bye. Great brief, Bassel.